Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time, and we especially uh, would like to thank our special guest today for taking the time being with us today to talk with us. Today, we are going to be talking about hurricane preparedness and some cool GANDALF data and some visuals. It's going to be a great webinar. I'd like to introduce you to our special guests, Brian LaMarre and Bob Currier. Brian is the NOAA Gulf Regional Team Lead and Meteorologist-in-Charge for the National Weather Service Office for the Tampa Bay Area and Ruskin, Florida Weather Forecast Office. And Bob is a research specialist in the Department of Oceanography with Texas A&M University and project developer and co-data manager at GCOOS. Again, thank you guys for being here today. We know you are very busy, especially during the hurricane season, but thank you very much for being here. And before we start, I just wanted to make sure, keep yourself muted during the presentations, but feel free to unmute yourself after Brian and Bob have finished for a Q&A session. You may also add a question into the chat box, and I will read them off after our presentations. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Brian.
All right. Thank you, Jen, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to get started here and load up the presentation. Everything good on your side, Jen?
Looks great. It looks great.
All right, perfect. Yeah, again, thank you for inviting me to speak at our GCOOS meeting here. And yeah, this is the time of year, hurricane season, and we're already in it. We've already had the first name storm, Alberto, which moved into Mexico last week and did a tremendous amount of flooding across Texas. And I say that because I'll talk about throughout this presentation how a hurricane or a tropical storm does not need to make landfall in your direct area to do significant impact. So I know someone on the line from Houston and may have had some water challenges depending on where exactly you do live, but Galveston area and southward into Corpus Christi and Brownsville had some areas had significant flooding, coastal flooding, and yet they were not under the cone that the National Weather Service's National Hurricane Center produces, that famous cone of uncertainty. I'll talk about that. None of the Texas coastline was under that cone as the system was well south going into Mexico. So I'm going to talk about the hurricane season outlook and what we do at the National Weather Service for decision support. I'm going to talk about some of the impacts and also some outreach and education, what we do here. And as Jen mentioned, I'm in charge of the office here in the Tampa Bay office in Ruskin. We cover pretty much the entire west coast of Florida and portions of central Florida as well. But looking back at the past couple of years, 2022 was significant for Florida and Puerto Rico for hurricane impacts. And you can see there were 18 different weather and climate events across the country in 2022, each of which produced over $1 billion in damage. So sometimes when people see this slide, they think $18 million. Well, no, those are 18 separate weather and climate events, each of which producing well over $1 billion. And an example there, Hurricane Ian that hit here September 28th, 2022. I'll talk about Ian. That was over $135 billion of damage. But you can see across the country, it ranges from droughts to wildfires to tornado events. And looking at last year, remember there were 18 events. Now there's 28 events, different natural disasters that produce significant economic impacts across the United States. So there was one hurricane that is on the list, and of course, it impacted this area. Hurricane Idalia pretty much flooded the entire west coast of Florida, and several other weather events you can see here: severe weather events, tornado outbreaks, hail events, flooding, drought, the whole gamut. And this here, a friend of mine from the Weather Channel put this together for me. And this is really showing how vulnerable and how volatile the Gulf of Mexico region is. So that's why I want to make sure I showed it to the GCOOS group and members showing up today, because the Gulf of Mexico, look at the hurricanes. You can see this is just from 2017 through last year. And these are the major hurricanes. So I mean major, not that it's some qualifier other than intensity, that this really means category 3, 4, or 5. So those are what are considered as a major hurricane. And you can see, 2017 we had Irma. Texas had Harvey. A lot of different impacts over the past few years. Louisiana had several impacts in 2020 and 2021, and Florida going from 2017, 2018, 22, and 23. So again, a lot of these names on the list, and this year is expected to be a record-breaking year. And you can see last year we were well above normal for the number of storms. But look at the map. I put this together every year, and you can see all of the tracks from 2023. You can see Africa on the right, United States on the left, South America on the bottom. Most of the tracks were over the Atlantic. And a lot of people will say, well, okay, that's not a significant year. Well, it is. I mean, there's a lot of commerce and shipping that goes on over that area. I tell people, pull out your cell phone. If you have the famous Flight Aware app where you can track, yourself or friends and family to see air travel across the country, across the world, there's an app, marinetraffic.com, and you'll see an enormous amount of traffic across the Atlantic. So whenever there are several hurricanes and tropical storms that form over the open Atlantic and Caribbean, it is impacting someone or something, because an enormous amount of commerce occurs across that area. So again, I put some numbers on the slide. You can see last year we had 20 named storms. 7 of those became hurricanes, and 3 were category 3, 4, or 5, a major. Now on the right-hand side, I put in parentheses what we should see every single year. So on average, every year, climatologically, we should see 14 storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 become major. So that's what we should see pretty much every year. And talking about the lead times, you hear meteorologists talk about rapid intensification. And if I was giving this talk, say, I don't know, 8 years ago, I would say, well, the science is really not that mature yet. There's a lot of research still, ongoing, with many research questions left unanswered on rapid intensification. Well, I'm not going to say that now, because the science has improved. A lot of research has provided a lot of answers to questions. A lot of technology has developed. We're going to hear about a lot of uncrewed systems, GANDALF, and with Bob, and remote sensing. There's a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning applications that are helping meteorologists with understanding rapid intensification. So on this particular slide, the director of the Hurricane Center, Mike Brennan, I was presenting with him at our Florida Governor's Hurricane Conference in May of this year. And so I asked him for this slide, but what I did is on the left-hand side, I put in red 4 storms. And those 4 storms are the last category 5 hurricanes that have made landfall in the United States. And, big surprise, they're all in the Gulf region. So you can see the 1935 Labor Day hurricane that hit the Florida Keys, Key West. There was a category 5 hurricane, Hurricane Camille hitting New Orleans area, Louisiana, 1969. Hurricane Andrew. A lot of folks in Florida will always remember that. That was 1992. August, and Andrew, the first letter. So it was a late starting season. The letter A didn't form till late August. And 1992 was actually a below normal year. There were only 7 storms total throughout the entire year of 1992. 7 storms. That's below the average. But yet we had one category 5 devastate portions of Florida. And the final one, the category 5 2018 Hurricane Michael, hitting the Florida Panhandle. And I bring up these storms because you think of these storms for preparation and lead times, but 3 days before, just 72 hours, even, as the slide says, 50 hours before landfall, all 4 of those category 5 hurricanes were tropical storms, ranging from 50 or 60 mile per hour winds. And that is a challenge for evacuation decisions, because there's not much time to leave an area before a major hurricane comes your way. Think of Pinellas County, okay? You really need about 72 hours to get everyone out of the storm surge area. And not many people will respond if the storm's a tropical storm. We got to break that public perception. But looking at this year, these are the names. So if you see, well, I know the name Chris is on our phone right now. If you see your name on here, hopefully your name will not be retired, because if it does get retired, that means a storm produced a lot of death and destruction, and obviously we don't want that. But Alberto already moved inland to Mexico last week and flooded portions of Texas. Some of these names may look familiar, for Florida and Tampa specifically. Tropical Storm Debbie. Yesterday was the anniversary when Debbie impacted Tampa in 2012. So again, 12 years ago, Debbie produced a significant amount of flooding across Tampa, Sarasota, tornadoes. A woman was killed in Highlands County from a tornado during Tropical Storm Debbie. And I say Tropical Storm Debbie because it does not have to be a hurricane to produce significant impacts. Also, Isaac on this list, was a developing hurricane right off our coast in August of 2012 when the Republican National Convention was in town, and Isaac canceled the first event. But this year, like I mentioned earlier, is forecast to be a record-breaking season. Unfortunately, there's an 85% chance of this season being above normal. But look at the ranges. I always say the up to, so up to 25 storms and 13 hurricanes and 7 major. So that's above the average, what I talked about earlier. And looking at some of the technology that we use in the National Weather Service to sample these storms, to really see the data from these storms, the radar, I'm sitting in my office in Ruskin, right on the other side of this wall is our Doppler radar, which is showing this image during Hurricane Ian. And I'm going to talk about on some slides coming up too about if you know where the center of the storm is going to go, okay, then usually on the right-hand side of that storm, the right-hand side of the track, keep in mind the storm is moving. So on the right-hand side of the track is where most of the devastating impacts will be when it comes to heaviest rainfall, the tornado potential, the storm surge. And I'm going to break that down and talk about each of those elements and also talk about that cone and really talk about what it means, but more specifically, what it does not mean. So this is the track of Hurricane Ian. You can see that black line with little squares on it, making landfall in Charlotte and Lee County. Again, this was September 28, 2022, 3:05 p.m. made landfall on Fort Myers Beach, and at 4:35 made landfall at Punta Gorda. So the second landfall an hour and a half later. So look at the colors. This is storm surge. So we're looking at 6 feet, 8 feet. The oranges and reds are like 10 to 15 feet of water. It's all on the right-hand side of that black line, right? So look at Sarasota County. Okay, look at Manatee County. You don't see any colors there. It's because you're on the left-hand side of that track. So again, if you know where the center is going to be, then you'll have a better idea of where will the killer storm surge be. But keep in mind that a hurricane is extremely large and those impacts can extend well away from the center. But when it comes to storm surge, it'll be to the right of the track. And here's the rainfall. Like I mentioned earlier, the storm is moving, so the track is going to be dynamic, and it's moving off to the northeast in this example. Over 2 feet of rain impacted portions of Charlotte County. And you see that swath of rainfall going from, Charlotte County, Lee County, all the way up off to Port Canaveral and up to Jacksonville area. So again, significant amount of flooding. People lost their life well away from the ocean where a lot of the rainfall was flooding their area and they were not able to get to higher ground. Now, I mentioned tornadoes. This is interesting. I haven't shown this in many of the presentations I've given so far this year, but again, think of it like a 360-degree quadrant, and there's the center of the storm. Okay, now the tornadoes typically will form in what we call the right front quadrant. Okay, so looking at this image, about 350 degrees to about 120, that northeastern portion. But this storm in this example is moving north. Okay, so you have to put your back to the wind and then look forward. It's your right front quadrant will be where 80% of the tornadoes will occur. So again, like I said, that's a northward moving storm. Not all storms move that way. It did for Hurricane Ian, and most of the tornadoes were on the right hand side. But think of a storm that's moving westward. Okay, think of Hurricane Harvey. Okay, think of Hurricane Francis and Jean in 2004 that impacted the east coast of Florida and then moved over the west coast. So again, you have to put your back to the wind, so tilt yourself. And that right front quadrant will be in a different location, and that's where the tornadoes will be. But we've all seen the cone, okay? You go to hurricanes.gov, the National Hurricane Center website, and you'll see it on all the TV stations. That cone that a lot of people make their decisions based off of. And I'm here to tell you that the cone is only one piece to a much larger puzzle, okay? The cone tells you absolutely nothing where the heaviest rain will be. The cone tells you absolutely nothing about where the strongest wind will be, or where the deadly storm surge will be, or the inland flooding will be. It tells you absolutely nothing about it. So I always get asked, well, why do we show it, right? Because the cone tells you where the greatest probability of where the center of the storm will go, where the eye will go, okay? So Hurricane Ian had about maybe a 20, 25 mile wide eye, but the storm itself was 500, 700 miles wide. The width of Florida is 150 miles wide, so you get the scope of what we'd look at here. But looking at the very first, or one of the advisories from the Hurricane Center on the left, this is when the cone was shifting up towards the Panhandle, okay, Appalachia Bay, Apalachicola. But at no time did Fort Myers ever leave the cone. They were on the right-hand side of the cone in this example. And we all know that, as the days progressed to a Wednesday landfall, the cone was making its changes. But on the right-hand side, I zoomed in, and you can see this is where the strongest wind was. This is where the heaviest rainfall was. And this small area is where the killer storm surge was. 36 people drowned in Lee County on Fort Myers Beach. They did not have to. Some people could not get out of the way. Some people didn't want to get out of the way. And some people didn't know where to go. So there's definitely a lot of room for helping people better understand what they need to do. I will say that the number of fatalities has significantly dropped over the decades. So the science is getting better, the technology is getting better, public perception is starting to improve, and we have people that are starting to understand the risk. And in Florida, we have another challenge, not that we don't have as many already, but when a hurricane is coming at us at an angle, okay, we have a north-south coastline, okay, from Cedar Key to Key West, or from Miami to Jacksonville, north and south. When a storm, in this example, I put Hurricane Ian, you can see on the left-hand side, where I'm sitting right now is about 125 miles from where I am to Fort Myers, where Hurricane Ian made landfall. If Hurricane Ian had shifted 20 miles, which is very easy to do, these storms can wobble around their circulations. If it had shifted 20 miles, that landfall would have been in Tampa Bay, right where I am right now. If it had shifted 25 miles, that landfall would have been in Cedar Key. So the angle of approach based on the north-south real estate is significant for us, for portions of Texas, for portions of the eastern United States. A small change can mean a significant difference. And that's why the cone is usually wider, because it's telling you that you have a threat in this particular area. And the National Hurricane Center is actually going to be making changes to the cone, very small changes. There'll be bigger ones coming in the future. But right now, we're going to be overlaying the inland threat for flooding and wind. So this one right here is going to be the wind impacts. So we're going to be overlaying the inland tropical storm and hurricane watches and warnings. So you can see, I'll zoom in right here. You can see in the case of Ian, there's blue areas where you may see tropical storm force winds, 40 miles an hour or greater. And you can see that smaller, although almost a third of the state of Florida, will be under the gun for hurricane force winds. So that'll be coming out in August. And looking at, this isn't Ian specific, this is all hurricanes from 2013 to 2022. You can see Florida, North Carolina, Texas, obviously the states that have the most coastline have the direct fatalities from storm surge and inland flooding. So again, water continues to be the number one killer with hurricanes and tropical storms. And we're seeing that more people are losing their life after the storm makes landfall. It's about the inland flooding now, more so than the storm surge. And this is the indirect fatalities. So again, more people are losing their life after the storm. And you can see some of these numbers, obviously the big years, 2017, 2022, carbon monoxide poisoning. People are having generators, but they don't want them to get stolen. So they're bringing these generators inside their garage and shutting the door and you know what happens at that point. So carbon monoxide poisoning, there's cardiac arrest. So again, a lot of fatalities are occurring after the storm. And so that's why National Weather Service continues to work 24/7 with emergency managers, public health departments, and other officials to make sure that they have the information after the storm, because heat is another killer during these storms because of power outages and lack of air conditioning. And this is several images that we all have seen after Hurricane Ian. Again, water going up to the tops of the roof lines. We tell people that they now have to, bring an axe or a chainsaw to their roof, to their attic if they're seeking shelter, because we saw during Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Ian that people had to chainsaw themselves out of their roof in order to get rescued by helicopter operations. So very, very significant impacts. And also want to talk about the danger of comparing storms. This happens a lot. I personally was down there in Fort Myers after Hurricane Ian, and I talked to people that they directly told me, they said, well, okay, well, National Weather Service, you told us that a Category 4 hurricane called Charlie was coming our way, and some of those people did not evacuate, and they survived. So now, fast forward to 2022, hey, National Weather Service, you're telling us that a Category 4 hurricane named Ian is coming our way. They thought they could stay and survive because they survived Charlie. And that is absolutely the worst approach anyone can have by comparing hurricanes. And you can see the reason why. Look at Charlie on the left, Category 4 hurricane. The eye was about 10 miles, and you can see the storm surge at the bottom was between 6 and 7 feet. Now, go to the right, Hurricane Ian, still a Category 4 hurricane. The eye was 26 miles. That part doesn't mean as much difference, but the storm surge was over 15 feet. I personally measured 15.4 feet down there in Fort Myers with a high water mark, where we go into structures and we see the still water mark. But Hurricane Harvey, or I'm sorry, Hurricane Ian was just so much larger than Hurricane Charlie, and that's what drives the ocean. That's what drives the water towards the coastline. And looking real quickly as I wrap up, Hurricane Idalia, you can see Florida on the right and Hurricane Idalia moving over the eastern Gulf of Mexico and producing a significant amount of flooding up and down the east coast and the west coast of Florida. The east coast of Florida had some tornadoes and strong winds, but the west coast of Florida had anywhere from, say, 2 to 3 feet in southwest Florida, where Hurricane Ian hit, on up to about over 6 feet of storm surge. And here's a map that we put together here at the National Weather Service Ruskin office. And again, look at down at the bottom. Look at Naples. Okay, they had 3 feet of storm surge, and that storm was over 175 miles to the west of them. And here, look at where I am. Okay, Tampa Bay. The storm was 100 miles west of here, and we had 4 feet of water in Tampa Bay. And farther up north, Cedar Key, that area was close to 7 feet of water. And again, the storm was about 60 miles west of them. And eventually the storm came in near Dixie County. And fortunately, it wasn't as populated, and there were no fatalities associated with the landfall of Hurricane Idalia. But looking at, as I mentioned before, some of the tornadoes, and I talked about how the right-hand side, or that right quadrant, you can see this is Irma in 2017. There's our radar as Irma. The remnant eye was over Hardy and DeSoto County right there that we have in our area responsibility. And you can see that band of storms to the right of the eye and off the East Coast. Look on the right-hand side, all those little boxes, we call them polygons. Those are warnings. Those are tornado warnings that we issue. In the red, we got severe thunderstorm warnings. And so there's that perfect example of the right front quadrant of that track is where we see the majority of the tornadoes. So lastly, my final point here, if you do not have this app, please get it. It's always good to have redundant ways to get weather information. This is a free app. The National Weather Service worked with FEMA to develop this app many years ago. It's free, so get it from whatever app store you have on your phone, and you can program different counties in there. So when we send out certain alerts, your phone is going to be alerted. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jen.
Thank you, Brian. That was fantastic. Great presentation. And, I also wanted to mention that we will be presenting or showing this video on our GCOOS YouTube site when ready, but really encourage to share with friends and family. I think this information is really important moving forward. But with that, I would like to move on to Bob. Bob, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready now that my network crashed on me right in the middle of Brian's presentation.
Oh
I,
no, of course
you,
it
you
did.
know, you know how that goes. It's been steady as a rock for weeks, and right when you're about to present, everything goes. But
Oh
um,
yes.
we got it back up. But thanks Jen for the invite, and hello everybody. Um, as Jen introduced us earlier, I'm Bob. I'd also like to ask our newest GANDALF team member, Zhao Qi, to turn his camera on for a minute and say hi to the group, because Zhao is going to be helping me build the next version of GANDALF, and he's already been exceptionally helpful. And the Argos display, the blue dots on the current GANDALF that you see, were Zhao's capstone presentation for his master's in data science at George Washington University. So he's already made some valuable contributions to GANDALF. All right, thanks, Zhao.
Thank you.
And let me bring up my slide deck, Jen, and make sure that
No
share
problem.
my screen window. Let's see if this works. Is it working?
I see it.
All right, and I am not in slide mode yet, but let's get into it. So now I
Great.
can't see what I'm showing, but how's the resolution?
It looks great.
Okay. All right. So this is a combination of a couple of slide decks that I had on hand. So a little bit of the presentation is going to be maybe a tiny bit geeky for this audience, but I'll try and skim over the really hardcore geek stuff and focus on the other. But GANDALF is our one portal to rule them all for AUV piloting in not only in the Gulf of Mexico, but in the Caribbean, Alaska, and up the East Coast. So GANDALF actually started before it ever was GANDALF. When I showed up in late 2005 at Mote Marine Laboratory, working for Dr. Gary Kirkpatrick, who had just gotten NSF funding to buy 3 of the first Slocum gliders on the market. And so I handled all the data display and visualization for the gliders. And in the beginning, we just supported Google Earth in KML format. Then we moved to a different language, went to SQLite for a database, and way back in the dark ages, we didn't even send data files back. It was simply surface log files. And we finally added Dead Reckoning, the data files, and a few other things in 2006. In 2007, we caught the Python train. We've been hard at it ever since, and Python. In 2008, we added support for Argos tracking, which really facilitates recovery of wayward gliders as long as they're on the surface. And in November 2014, a few months after Barb moved to GCOOS to become the new ED, I followed her. And Matt Howard, who is no longer with us, but was our first data manager, asked for me as my first project to replicate for the Gulf of Mexico what I had done for Gary and Mote with a So Cool portal for breadbusters for Carenia brevis and Slocum gliders. So rather than the single institution, to make it Gulf, encompass the Gulf. So when I start a new project, I've got to have an acronym. I can't work until I have a good acronym. So we came up with GANDALF, which is the Global AUV Network Data Archive and Layer Fusing. And again, this is some of the geeky stuff, but it's important. So Teledyne Web, who's the vendor that makes the Slocum gliders, provides their own software and data environment. And you can run it yourself if you have qualified people, or you can rent time from Teledyne Web and let them handle the hard part, which a lot of people do. So GCOOS does not run anything that directly supports the gliders. So we have to work with our partners, dock servers, be it USF or Catherine Edwards at Skidaway, or Tamu, who originally was running a dock server and now runtime from Teledyne Web in the cloud, which is really, in my opinion, the most effective way of doing this, because where are most oceanographic research facilities? On the coast, and particularly in the Gulf of Mexico, where hurricanes like to hit the coast. So by having your primary glider data management facility located a few feet above sea level, you're at risk. So pushing it up to the cloud really makes it easier for continuity of operations. If you have to abandon, let's say Moat needs to pack up everything and move inland or out of the state, as long as they have internet access, they can still manage their gliders and have absolutely no loss in service because it's in the cloud. So we need to have multiple methods of grabbing that data, which is a whole presentation in and of itself. Real-time plots. Matt wanted the dashboard look that we started with the Moat version. Everybody wanted us to display waypoints so that everybody in the team could see where the gliders were heading. Support multiple vehicle types. And my number one rule is, this is all for the operators and the scientists. That's what GCOOS is here for. That's what I'm here for. So listen to our operators and users, and don't build what I want to build, but build what the scientists want and what they will use. So this is, and just to pause for a minute, I'm going to go through all the slides, and then as long as we have time and Jen says it's okay, I'll do a quick live demo on GANDALF because there are a few things that are different than what I have in the slide deck, and it's always fun to work on a live demo during a presentation because invariably something goes wrong. So this is GANDALF pretty much as it looks today. You can see that we have animated streamlines if we were on the live version, and assuming that a lot of you have already looked at GANDALF extensively. So those are generated from the daily HICOM model file, and the NetCDF is read, and then a segment of that data is pulled out, and these animated streamlines are generated and then dropped on the GANDALF base map as an animated layer. This is from one of our busier seasons last year. So we have sail drones, which are the orange colored markers down here. We have slocum gliders and we have sea gliders. Of particular note are the two Mexican sea gliders from Secesi that were deployed last year and will be deploying this year. And that was a huge win and was extremely valuable to the models to have those vehicles where they were, providing data that flowed up to the NDBC and then to EMS or EMC and then into the models for the forecasting. So one of the great things about GANDALF are the different layers that are available. And these layers have changed a little bit from this slide. So I'll show the new ones when we get to the live section. But operators can pull up bathymetry, the navigational charts, all the buoys and beacons. These are coming from NOAA, shipping lanes, oil platforms, the EEZ, which is very important when you're operating in the Straits of Florida. And we want to make sure that we don't disappear into Cuban waters because a lot of things happen if we drift into Cuban waters. For models, so we've got HICOM with full depth. We've got the AOML geostrophic layer. We've added a couple more models since these slides were done. For satellite and radar, we have the HF or CODAR sites, NOAA NEXRAD, GOES, MODIS, and USF. So the operators like to layer these, and this is one thing that distinguishes GANDALF from other platforms in that each layer has 0 to 100% transparency. So most portals, they're either on or off, so it's hard to build up a composite. With GANDALF, you can dial the layers up and down, so you can have the gliders, NEXRAD, currents, and charts all visible at the same time. We provide 2D scatter plots for the operators. Each institution that we support gets their logo put in the bottom left of the plot. These are publication ready, high enough resolution, and we can plot whatever sensors are on the gliders, assuming that the operator wants us to plot the sensor, and that we have the ability to extract that data from the files that are being sent back. So typically it's water temperature, chlorophyll, dissolved oxygen, turbidity, and depending on the vehicle, several other things. We do support 3D plots. Right now, they're not enabled because these are generated using Plotly. They wind up being HTML files, and again, getting a little bit geeky. But just leaving it after a vehicle has been out for a couple of months, the plots get really, really, really big, and I mean like 60 to 100 megs. And it tends to make most browsers blow up before the plots ever show up. So that's one thing that Joe and I will be working hard at as we build out GANDALF version 2, is to find a way to render the server side and to be able to provide 3D plotting, with full rotational ability. And I don't know if you can see my hands or not, but I'm moving my hands around. The full 3D rotation in real time in GANDALF version 2 without crashing your browser. So one of the biggest projects that we've taken on, and it was really thanks to Kevin Martin at USM, was integrating sea gliders, because sea gliders provide data in NetCDF, which is wonderful, because typically vehicle manufacturers provide data in their own proprietary format, which means we have a lot of heavy lifting to do before we can wind up with a NetCDF file that can go to the glider DAC and then to the NDVC and then get ingested into the models. Unfortunately, the sea glider NetCDFs are not IUs compliant. So I worked with Kevin as my guinea pig and completely rewrote everything to take what the sea glider base station generates and convert it to an IUs compliant NetCDF file. So we tested it with the Mexican Sesese gliders, verified that it worked, and we were going to deploy with Kevin and his first mission of the season. And I think Kevin was at a conference and mentioned this, and we got a request in from Jamie Palter at URI, who had a sea glider that was already deployed. And this is one of those serendipitous occasions. She was required by her funding source to get her data onto the GTS and ingest it into the models. And at the time that her sea glider went wet, they didn't have the ability to do that. So we got her up as the first production deployment on GANDALF for sea gliders, and it worked perfectly. And we wound up pushing, I think, about 1,400 files to the GDAC and then to the GTS. So again, geek stuff, I'll skip over most of it, but it's about 1,500 lines of code, including the config file. Almost all the settings are done in the config file, so that we can make changes to the metadata depending on the PI, the project, whoever's operating it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And as I mentioned, 1,300 NetCDF files pushed to the GTS for Jamie's Sea Glider 658. And then the next vehicle we took on were sail drones, and a huge shout out to Greg Foltz and everybody at AOML and the NOAA PML crew on the West Coast, because we get the data from the PML ERDAP server. So the data goes from Sea Glider, the deployed Sea Glider, to Sea Glider, the company, and then to the behind the firewall NOAA PML infrastructure. And then eventually, thanks to the PML, my counterpart at PML, it gets pushed to the public ERDAP server at PML. And then GANDALF is able to harvest via ERDAP from PML so that we can get it up on GANDALF. But we also push everything that's on GANDALF to the sail drone mission portal in real time. So it's a nice exchange of information and coordination. So right now, there are 2 sea gliders that are deployed. They're transiting out to the operational area. They're sending data back, but the mission doesn't start until August 1st. So no, we won't have real-time data on GANDALF until August 1st. That's a contractual thing, and there's not much we can do about it. The exception being if we get a major storm, then Sail Drone has agreed to go ahead and enable real-time data collection. So if we get a major storm, they will show up on GANDALF. Now that since we had that great presentation by Brian on hurricanes, this is how hurricanes appear on GANDALF. We briefly had a storm, I guess, earlier this week, last week, I've lost track, but it showed up and disappeared very quickly. This again was from last year when we had a lot of activity. So on GANDALF, the cones and the track are automatic. If NOAA is producing them, they'll automatically show up on GANDALF. There's no box to check. There's nothing that you have to do. They just show up. And when the storms dissipate and the tracks are removed, they disappear. But as you can see, we had 3 going on right here. And there were probably a dozen or more vehicles deployed. Last year, I think we topped out at around 28 total vehicles on GANDALF. And for a really good visualization, thanks to some exceptional planning and exceptional good luck. For Adalia, we had several vehicles, a sail drone and 2 Slocum gliders, one from Chad, that unfortunately, after it collected a lot of valuable data, never came up, was destroyed by Adalia. But we were right under the eye. So Adalia passed directly over 3 vehicles. We got a huge amount of data. That's what this is all about. So getting the vehicles out in the path of the storm, and while the sail drones are deployed, if a storm forms, then getting the sail drones hopefully to be directly in the path, and then the gliders move a little bit slower, but trying to get the gliders as close as we can, and then collect that data. And so what happens to all that data? Well, there are a couple people on this call that attend these meetings. So every Thursday afternoon, a bunch of us meet. The meeting is led by Scott Glenn and Travis Miles, who, along with Lev Looney from NOAA, are all in Busan, South Korea right now, talking about exactly this sort of thing. But Scott and Travis and Mike Smith, who's the software engineer at Rutgers, provide data model comparisons between what the major models are and the in situ platforms. They provide the raw images. They're stored on the Rutgers server, and then GANDALF harvests those and then integrate that into the pop-up box. When you click on a vehicle, you'll see a smaller version of this. But every Thursday, we go through this and look at the performance of, this is Unit 307, which is a Texas A&M glider, and then the 4 different models, RTOFs, the RTOFs parallel model, which is looking really good this year, GOFs, and then the European model, Copernicus or CMEMS, and look at the variation between in situ and what the vehicles are providing. And you can definitely see the impact when there are no vehicles out there sending data as to what the models think is going on. And when we have quite a few vehicles in the water, then everything comes together very nicely and looks a lot more similar to what you see on the left and the right in here. So that happens every week during storm season. And then all this data, as I said, goes directly to the models and gets ingested. And we go back to this for 1 minute. Last year, thanks to Scott and Don Petraeus and the folks at the glider deck and all of our operators, we spent a long time tracking the data flow from vehicles in the water to GANDALF to the glider deck to NDBC, NDBC to the GTS, and the GTS finally into the models, and then validating that the data was actually getting ingested and used into the models. And we were able to do that. There were a lot of challenges along the way, but that pipeline was finally cleaned up, and we have clean data flow now, and it's been very, very helpful. And lastly, the architecture, for anybody that's interested, again, more geek stuff. It's completely Dockerized. It's all Python. We can do a lot of other fun stuff. I'll kind of skip over it. And then acknowledgments. These are all of our partners. Matt Howard, who asked for GANDALF to begin with before it even was GANDALF. And then USF and MOTE, AOML, the Navy, who's been wonderful to work with, Skidaway, USM, everybody that's been part of this program. And let me stop this, and I'm going to try. Do I have time, Jen?
You sure do.
All right, let me stop sharing that one and go to GANDALF, and this one will be quick. dashboard, share, window, GANDALF, share, boom. Okay, so here we go. Let's hope nothing breaks. But this is live GANDALF. So we have 3 vehicles deployed. Howdy, or Unit 307 from Texas A&M, Unit 1148, which is nameless to date, also Texas A&M, and then USF Bass, Chad Lemke. So we have the dashboard, which you can turn on and turn off depending to your wish. When things get really busy, it can be hard to zoom in and find the vehicle you're interested in. So we have a teleport button, and I will pick on, let's go to Howdy. So you can click on teleport, and that will take you to a zoomed in version of the vehicle. You can see the waypoint, and if you click on Howdy, then you will get the last report, why it surfaced, the mission it's running, the position, the next waypoint, where the data is coming from, and then the science plots. This black line that you'll see here, I'm sure some of you know what this is, but for those of you that don't, that's a feature that we turn on during hurricane season on GANDALF. It's the 26-degree line, which means that anything above that line is food for the hurricane. So it's important to see what depth that's at. And Howdy is in pretty shallow water, so that's looking like it's at around between 35 and 45 meters. We also have density, sigma, and salinity. Those are the only parameters we're getting from Howdy. If we look at 1148, it's running down to 1,000 meters, so we have a lot more data. And nice freshwater layer here on the salinity. We're also doing depth average currents, which are really picking up, which can be really challenging for the operators. And let me check on Bass. So Bass again in shallower water, so we're looking at that 26-degree line at around 15 meters or so. Salinity, chlorophyll, backscatter, CDOM, and DO for that. So the operators use this feature extensively, and we also support AIS. So we don't have a full AIS license, so we're able to get positions of the research fleet in real time, which aids in vehicle recovery. If we have a vehicle in distress and we need to get one, this is a couple of days old, so it's not that good. But the FG Walton Smith from a minute ago, the Hogarth is in Tampa from 2 minutes ago, and looks like we've got the Nancy Foster up here. So if Bass got into trouble, we know the Nancy Foster is not that far away, and the operators will typically get on the sat phone and see if the chief scientist is able to help us out. So in terms of layers, and then I will wrap it up with the new layers, we have the depths, as I mentioned. Let me zoom in a little bit here. There we go. So we have depths. We have all the buoys and beacons, again, useful as you're trying to plan your piloting. Platforms, which is down. Nope, there we go. It's definitely not in Mississippi. So a little bit of a data lag. They are there. The World EEZs, as I mentioned. So we try and skirt this line if we're getting into the Straits of Florida. The current models we support are RTOFs with salinity. And let me zoom back out a little bit. Sometimes that helps. Yeah, we've got a little bit of lag on that. There we go. So we can do that. We can also look at salinity depth. Not sure if that's going to work given the lag. Yeah, my network is pretty laggy, but you can look at it all the way down to the bottom. We get RTOF's velocity. And again, we can do it with depths. We can do SSH. And I haven't checked this one in a couple of days, so it looks like we're lagging or we don't have it. But this is it's a beta product from Rutgers, and that's depth average currents across the Gulf of Mexico. And finally, this one is always good, the AOML geostrophic. So operators have a lot of models to pick from. And then finally, satellite and radar. We have any active CODAR sites, our NWS NextRad, and a couple of new layers. Thanks to Nan Walker from LSU, we have a really nice SST image. And let's see if my network holds up to, yeah, I knew that was gonna do that. Oh, we have the color bar. Try it one more time. Yeah, live demos. What are you going to do? I'll zoom back out. So we'll drop down to USF. These are images that are harvested daily. So we have both chlorophyll and SST. And let me try this again. Nan and her team have done a really good job of generating this image. It's very high resolution. It's very easy to see filaments of temperature change, and it's just not going to work for me. So I will wrap it up with one more demo. Let's pick on Zhao's work. So for the Argo floats, this is all in real time. It's a bounding box query that covers the Gulf of Mexico, the Northern Caribbean, and out to about 30, where are we? 30 degrees longitude over here. And we get the most recent cycles. So this was on June 20th. So it's a little bit old. That's not what I wanted. So you get the most recent cycles of TNS. You also get time series plots over the entire deployment of that float. And again, I clicked the wrong button. But we have a fair number of these in the Gulf of Mexico. So again, they're very useful. We're also working on supporting the new BGC Argos floats. They're not ready yet, but we will support that. And we're trialing right now a new vehicle with USM, which is the Heffring Ocean Scout, which is a smaller, lighter, cheaper glider for shallow water deployments. So that should get splashed in a few days. And with that, the last bit, if you're interested in what we've done in the past, we have a data portal, which goes all the way back to, where are we? 2011. So you can see most everything that's been on GANDALF if we have the data. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Code.
That's it.
That's great. And thank you so much to both of you. And we have just a couple minutes for questions. And I do have a question for Brian and Bob from Kate. It's not a question. She's just saying hello. Hi, Kate. But anyway, does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask? Brian has a hard drop at 3 o'clock, but if anyone has any questions, you can unmute yourself or ask a question in the chat box. Thanks, Nan.
Yeah, thanks, Nan, and sorry that the layer was giving me trouble. It always works that way. They work perfectly when you're not presenting, but when you're demoing, things go wrong.
No problem. And if you do have a question and you'd like to send me an email about it, I can direct it to Bob or Brian. No problem at all. Oh, Nan has her hand up. Nan, go for it.
Hey, Bob. Thanks for showcasing the the satellite imagery this time. Yeah, sorry it didn't reload. I have noticed it's a little slow, so maybe there's some way we can speed it up. Maybe we have to resample the data a little or something. Anyway, if you have any ideas, let me know.
I will, and thanks for working with us on this. And
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
what Zhao is going to be helping us with. So that's definitely at the top of our list is building a much faster layer serving infrastructure, and we have some ideas on that. And offline, we'll reach out to you and make sure that we get this addressed as we start building out version 2.
Sounds good. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thanks, Nan. Anybody else for Bob? Okay. Well, I think it just turned 3 o'clock. All right. Well, I guess we'll end it from there. And if you do have any questions, let us know. And really want to thank you, Bob and Brian, for participating today and talking with us. Thanks again.